Very good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, A Smarter Approach to Park Finance. Today, I'm joined with Kim Russell. You might feel that we've gone back in time. We're back to webcast, and Kim's back, but we are actually we actually are in the future. Kim, it's great to have you with us today. How are you feeling?
Great, thank you. Excited.
I'm very excited to see what you've got to show us about park finance today. Not always the most exciting subject on the planet, but I'm sure you've got some great insights for us throughout. Before we actually move into the webcast, just a couple of bits of housekeeping for you to be aware of. At the very top of your screens, you've got a little Q&A button. So if you do have any questions that you want to submit throughout today's webcast, please feel free to submit them and we will answer all of those questions at the very end. And a big fat disclaimer there, this webcast is being recorded. So if you do participate in live Q&A, you want to be brave enough to actually come on camera and ask your question directly to Kim, you can do, that's not a problem. But just please bear in mind that your mic and camera are being recorded and you're consenting to us using that clip wherever we see fit in the future. So Kim, we have actually got quite a packed agenda today. So do you want to run us through what we should be expecting from you today?
Yeah, thanks, Callum. So many of you are still using systems outside of EliteParks to manage finance, which creates a lot of duplicated effort, reconciliation between two systems, and means that you don't have a single version of the truth. So in the webcast today, we're going to have a look at sales ledger, options to automate month-end journals using deferral templates, purchase ledger, having more control over purchase orders using functionality called pro forma purchase orders. We're also going to have a look at using OCR technology to register purchase invoices. Then we'll move on to banking and look at how you can save time, not having to import and post bank transactions, but actually using a bank statement feed instead. And then options for reconciling your bank account using Copilot, which is the AI-powered assistant embedded in EliteParks. We'll then move on to fixed assets and inventory, so how you can keep your fixed assets audit ready, all inside your finance system. And then lastly, we'll have a look at reporting, so everything from budgets to income statements, running cash flows, looking at multi-dimensional reporting, and then lastly, how you can use embedded Power BI reports in your dashboards. So yeah, let's take a look.
We're going to start today by looking at site fee invoicing, which I understand some of you may already use this feature to run all of your site fee invoices and then transfer that information from the general ledger in EliteParks into your existing finance system. A feature that can be used alongside this is this deferral template option. So I have simply created a deferral for site fees, which we'll see in a bit more detail once the invoices have been generated. Once I've assigned this deferral template to the site fee invoicing routine, if I then go ahead and actually raise these invoices, and we then go into sales invoices and have a look at one of these invoices that have just been generated. Just going down then to the invoice lines, I can see on my invoice that the deferral code is now applied, so that will be applied to each of the sales invoices. And just by selecting the assist edit function here next to that deferral template, I can actually see how this deferral is working on the invoice. So I've set it up to say this invoice covers a 12-month period, therefore I would like to defer that income over 12 months. It has a start date assigned to it as well, which could be the posting date of the invoice, for example, or actually if you wanted to change the start date, I can do that within the deferral schedule here. Once I've changed that date, I can simply recalculate the schedule and it now starts my deferrals from the 1st of March. So that's what the deferral code looks like once it's been set against the sales invoice. Then in terms of how this will post, if we just do a preview posting and have a look at the GL entries that have been created, we have the normal entry that we would expect to see here, the site fee income being posted into our income general ledger code. We then have some additional entries here to show firstly that income being taken out of the general ledger code and being moved into deferrals. And then we have all of these individual entries that are releasing that deferred income over the next 12 months as we have assigned to do so in the schedule. So something that currently could be quite a manual job to do, working out when site fees have been invoiced, how that should be deferred over the 12 months, someone then having to actually manually post that journal at the end of each month. By using this simple deferral code process, the system actually generates all of those entries for you. Then when it comes to your customers paying for things like site fees, rather than having to individually go to each of your customer accounts to take payments or manage those payments via a payment journal, we have a feature called Register Customer Payments. This is set up in the background so that you can choose a journal that you want these payments to be posted via, and that will automatically happen when you choose to post from here. Likewise, you can decide which bank account you want these payments to go to. So if you do use various bank accounts, maybe for different parks, you're also able to do this using this feature. This now gives us a list of every single invoice that's currently outstanding for you to simply go through and tick to say, yes, the customer has made payment. We've received the money into the bank account today for each of these invoices. Once they've all been ticked, I can then simply choose to post my payments, and they have now posted obviously to the customer ledgers and into the bank account, ready for me to complete my bank reconciliation. Now moving on to purchase ledger. The first thing that we're going to look at is the functionality of creating a pro forma order. I'm just going to run through some of the setup first so that you can fully understand how this works. So we can create pro forma categories. For example, we have maintenance, owner recharges, utilities in here, and within these categories we can then create a template, and this template can tell the system whoever is creating the pro forma order for a particular item, based on maybe the area of the business that they work in, they are allowed to only use certain general ledger codes. So the example that we've got in here for owner recharge of works, it tends to be a similar situation, that you will have an income code that you'll post any income to for recharges, and you'll also have an expense code to make sure that you're capturing any of those costs that relate to rechargeable work to customers. So having this template set up and assigned to a user means that they only have the option of using the correct expense code and not incorrectly selecting the income code as part of their purchase order. Once those pro forma categories are set up, you can also then group these. So we have pro forma category filter groups. So if in the example that we're using, it was maybe a maintenance team member, they needed to post orders for maintenance jobs maybe as well as recharges, we can assign multiple categories within this filter group to say actually someone in maintenance should be able to post to general ledger codes that relate to maintenance as well as general ledger codes that relate to recharges to customers. Those filter groups can then also be linked to users within the system. Then when it comes to creating that pro forma order, if we just select a new order here, and we'll select the vendor that we're buying from, I then have the option to say which of these categories will this order relate to. So in this example, it's going to be a TV aerial that should be recharged on to an owner. So we'll put TV aerial in the description. I can select my part code in here as well. Then when it comes to actually completing the detail about the price, etc. on the pro forma order, if I go into my process options at the top and add new lines. Now, based on the category that I've selected, it's automatically pulling this line through for me. So there's no option for me to go in and change this general ledger code. The system is automatically telling me which general ledger code should be used. And that proforma order is now complete. Now, you can also then send this through an approval process based on the setup that you choose to use in EliteParks. So it could be that actually these don't need to be approved, but if they are approved, it means that the purchase order will not be created until this document has been approved. So I'm firstly going to send this for approval, and then in this situation I am also the approver, just the way that I'm set up in this system. So I can also then go ahead and approve that myself as well. The next step then, once that's been approved, is that EliteParks will automatically then create the corresponding purchase order. If I now just refresh this, I can see that it's been released and my purchase order has been created. I can navigate through to the purchase order from my proforma purchase order. So I'd say this is a really great way to put some controls in place for purchasers throughout the business to ensure that when they're raising purchase orders, they are correctly selecting general ledger codes that are relevant for the purchases that they're making, also putting stipulations in place possibly over the part code and the department that they're using for those general ledger codes as well. So ultimately, by the time a purchase invoice comes through, purchase ledger team can be more trusting on the fact that actually what's been selected, where it's being coded to, is correct, and it's a much easier case of then just being able to enter the invoice details and post that purchase invoice, rather than having to pass that back and to maybe with the team to check which codes should these things be posted to and possibly make corrections as well. We'll now have a look at the purchase ledger and purchase invoicing side of things. So there's an add-on that works alongside EliteParks called Continue Document Capture, and this uses OCR technology to read information on an invoice, select fields that are appropriate in order for you to have that invoice posted into the system. So just looking at a role center here, I can see we've got 6 invoices ready to import. And if I just select to import files here, once those have then been imported, I can see that we've got 27 documents ready to register. So if I click into here, I can now see a number of invoices that are waiting to be posted into the system. So if I select one of these Dell invoices, and just to show how this OCR technology works, everything then that you can see highlighted on this invoice, so we've got an invoice number, the order number, the date of the invoice, we've got some information from the description. Likewise, it's picked up the net amount, the VAT, the gross amount from here, and I can see where it's actually picked that information up and entered that information into the system. So in this example, there is a purchase order that was created that works alongside this purchase invoice. So if I wanted to check that the system has correctly identified the purchase order as well, I can go into match lines here, and this is then pulled through 2 potential orders that could relate to this invoice. So I know from the amount of the invoice and the fact that it was a wireless keyboard that we were being invoiced for, that the second one is the correct purchase order. I simply select a toggle match, and that order is now linked to the purchase invoice. Now, in order for me to do that, it did have to check through the system and make sure that that purchase order was receipted as well. So it's obviously reliant on that purchase order process working correctly. Once I have associated the order with the invoice, the document is then ready to register, which I can select from here to register this. Now, the way that this system is set up means that once you've chosen to register an invoice, it actually creates the purchase invoice as it stands unposted, because we then send this through an approval process, because we want an approval to happen before the invoice actually gets posted to the system. So we can see at the moment now this is in pending approval status, and I'm just going to close out of that invoice, and then we'll go into our list of purchase invoices to see if that has now been approved. And I can see that that has been approved already, as the status is now set to released. So that example that I've shown you was quite a simple invoice, just being able to pick up things like an order number, the date, the description, the amount. When it comes to processing invoices in EliteParks, using dimensions such as part code or department code, you're able to also set translations up using continue document capture. So if an invoice comes in and it's addressed to a park name that might not necessarily relate directly to the park code, you're able to manipulate that against a specific vendor, for example, to say when the vendor sends it in saying X, actually we want to associate that with park code Y. So as well as being able to register really simple invoices, you can definitely also do more complex purchase invoicing using continue document capture. And you can obviously use that alongside your existing purchase workflows. So if you choose to use purchase orders or purchase invoices, or if you go direct to purchase invoices, or actually you want to maybe change the process that you follow at the moment, there are many levels of approval that can be used alongside this. We're now going to have a look at the bank statement and bank reconciliation process that can be completed within Elite Finance. So the first part of this process is looking at the bank feed, which is an integration between your bank and EliteParks, and allows a statement to automatically download into the system and to then be able to identify the type of payment, the type of transaction that is on the bank statement, and where that should actually be posted to within the system. So I can see here that I have one bank account that's connected. We can then see that there are 17 statement lines and 9 journal lines. The reason for the difference here is that, for example, if you're processing a number of vendor payments through EliteParks and you want to be able to pick those up and actually put the payments on at the time that you're processing those payments, you can tell this bank feed, actually don't recognise any of my vendor payments because they will have already been inputted ourselves at source when we are preparing those vendor payments. So that's just one example of why there could be a difference between the statement lines and the journal lines. But in any example that there would be a difference, that's always something that is set up and determined by yourselves. So you wouldn't ever see a situation where there was a difference in the two if it's not a predetermined payment type that you have decided yourselves that you don't want the bank feed to actually pull through. Now if I look into journal lines, I can see a number of transactions then here that have been brought through into EliteParks using this statement feed, and what the tool is then doing is identifying where this is a direct debit, for example. We know that this direct debit relates specifically to this vendor, or where this is maybe a bank charge. We have trained this to post our bank charges to this general ledger code. So there'll be minimal work at the beginning to help the system also identify when it's this payment type. I expect it to either go to a vendor account or I expect it to go to a general ledger account. There are situations with customer payments where if they use their customer number, for example, or invoice number on the bank statement as a payment reference, the system would automatically be able to register that that is for a specific customer and assign that payment to the customer as well. So once that statement has fed through into here, it's then just a case of posting these entries and then continuing on to complete your bank reconciliation. So it's a great feature that saves a lot of manual input, maybe having to log into a bank on a daily basis, download a bank statement from your bank, and then upload that bank statement into your finance system to be able to then complete that bank reconciliation. If we move on now then to look at the actual bank rec itself, so I've created a new bank account reconciliation. What I can see here is my bank statement lines, so the entries that have came through on my bank statement versus my bank account ledger entries, which are the entries actually posted into EliteParks. Now, I do have the option within this bank account reconciliation to utilize the software that's already here to help me to match those transactions off. So this match automatically option allows me to set a tolerance, and I can say actually maybe if it's a backs payment that I put onto the system 2 days ago and it's only just gone out of the bank today, I will allow a 2-day tolerance for that match to happen. But outside of that tolerance, the system will look at transaction dates and the amounts of the transactions to see if those two amounts do reconcile against each other. Alternatively, I can use Copilot to do this reconciliation. So the benefit of using Elite Finance within EliteParks is that this is a Microsoft product and automatically has Copilot, the AI tool, in various different areas of the system that you can then utilize with day-to-day activities like the bank account reconciliation, for example. So I'm going to select this Copilot icon here, choose to reconcile, and this will then now help with my bank reconciliation. So I can see that the system itself has automatically matched 0 of my 3 lines. However, Copilot has matched 3 of those 3 lines. And if we then just have a look at the proposals, we have the first entry, which is like for like, the amount is the same, the date is the same. Likewise with this second option, the value and the date is the same. When we then come down to the third option, it looks like this one amount that's came through on our statement is actually looking to apply to multiple entries. So I can drill into here and look at what those entries actually are. I can see the individual amounts of those, and I've then got the option myself to say, actually, I don't want to accept what Copilot is suggesting, I'll do this myself, or yes, I'll keep it because I trust that these transactions are correct, and actually I've had a chance to have a look at those myself as well. So the bank reconciliation in itself is quite an easy process with this match automatically option. However, with the addition of Copilot and using AI technology to help with those tasks, it makes it such a quicker and easier task, especially when it comes to one-to-many transactions like we've just seen in that example. We're now going to have a look at fixed assets and how you can manage your fixed asset register inside of EliteParks. So this is what the fixed asset register would look like. You're able to see all of your individual assets, what subclass those assets sit in, and what the book value is of those assets. And also in a situation where this might be a unit and it's a fleet unit that sits as an asset, you can also see the corresponding unit number. We're just going to have a look at this lawnmower as an example. So you can create these fixed assets on acquisition based on a fixed asset template, and that template then assigns the type of class, type of subclass to the fixed asset, and behind the subclass that's selected there is an element of posting set up here that allows you to tell the system, when I acquire the asset, this is the general ledger code I would like it to be posted to. When I run depreciation, this is the general ledger code I would like it to be posted to, and so on. These subclasses also hold depreciation rules against them, so you can tell the system the depreciation method that you'll be using based on the type of asset. Then when it comes to a month-end process of running depreciation, it's just a case of actually processing that in the system that will automatically create a journal for you to post that depreciation as well. The thing that we're going to look at in a bit more detail on fixed assets is the option to capitalise and decapitalise units. So if you have stock units that are for sale, or if you currently have units that are used for bookings and you maybe switch between the two, the option is here to select those units and choose to capitalise them, therefore moving them into fixed assets and using them as a hire fleet unit, or likewise decapitalising something that's possibly been a hire fleet unit and you're now wanting to move it back into stock. So if we firstly look at the option to capitalise, sorry, I've selected one that wasn't in stock. So I can see now that this one is in stock. We have an inventory value, we have a standing value here, and the option to capitalise is simply a button on the ribbon on the unit card. So I can select here to capitalise the unit. I can enter a description here. I can choose the date for which I want this unit to go into my fixed assets. And what this now does is tell me what journal entries will be created if I do go ahead and actually run the capitalisation of the unit. The section at the top is creating a fixed asset journal. So this is showing the acquisition. It's pulling through the amount based on the current standing value, and it's also correctly chosen the general ledger code that that fixed asset should be posted to. Then if I look at the bottom here, the item journal is also being created to take this value out of stock, and therefore it's running a negative adjustment inside the item journal. Then if we just move to the top here, we've got a few different options. So I can generate the journals, which means that I would manually go in and post those. I can choose to generate and post those journals, or I can choose to abandon if I don't want to go ahead at the moment. So I'm going to generate the journals in this situation. And we'll now just come out of here and post those journals. So firstly, if I look at the fixed asset general ledger journal, that line is now there created for me, just ready to be posted. And likewise, if I go into my item journal as well. So this is just an extra step that users might want in place to check the journal themselves before posting, rather than relying on the posting automatically happening. But either way, that will post the entries as expected to then put that into fixed assets. And I can now see the bottom entry is the unit that we have just looked at to capitalise. So that's how it looks in fixed assets. And if I go back into the unit card itself, if I just scroll back down here now into this inventory section, we can no longer see an inventory value, we've no longer got a stock value here, and we have a fixed asset number assigned instead. If we then look at the other side of this, to decapitalise, so I have a unit here that already has a fixed asset number associated with it, therefore it's already being capitalised. If we wanted to possibly take that out of hire fleet and move that into stock and maybe sell that as a used unit, in the same way that I could capitalise, I can also decapitalise here from the ribbon. Again, it's asking me for a posting date and a posting description. And it's asking if I want to calculate depreciation at the same time as well. So if for any reason depreciation hadn't ran on this asset and we still needed to make sure that that happened before moving it back into stock at the correct value, I can make sure that that gets captured at this point. So I'll leave that switched on in case depreciation hasn't yet been calculated. And then we can see here, again, we've got fixed assets at the top, we've got the item journal at the bottom. The only difference being here is that as well as creating the fixed asset journal line to dispose of this asset, we also have this top line that's posting any depreciation that's required as well. And again, we've got those same options in place to say if we want to generate the journals or generate and post those journals. So these are really good ways that you can move stock to fleet, fleet to stock, without having to do the manual movements yourselves, without having to manually run the depreciation to work out what the book value should be to possibly bring it back into stock. It's all something that just happens periodically within EliteParks, and at the click of a button you can then choose to capitalise or decapitalise. And obviously when it comes to the fixed asset register itself, I think many people tend to run their fixed asset register in an Excel workbook, and they are again manually calculating depreciation, creating and posting journals each month. So it takes away the need to manage something outside of a system, and instead gets rid of that Excel document and brings it inside of EliteParks. Projects is a really nice piece of functionality that sits alongside fixed assets, I would say, because it allows you to manage ongoing CapEx projects, which ultimately will potentially sit as part of your fixed asset register. So if I firstly have a look at projects, we've got a few projects set up in here already. So you can set up as many projects as you would like to use, give the name that you would like to use for the project. Then if we come down to the actual project tasks, I'm able to create a budget in here. I can have various budget lines all based on a single project. We can set a start and end date if we've got an indication of when the project is likely to start and finish, and then I can also set my budget entries in here as well. If we then move across to actual cost, you can see that some costs have already been posted to this project, and in order to do this we can create purchase invoices and post purchase invoices whilst also assigning them to a general ledger code, selecting the project number and the task number that that cost relates to. So if we just come out of here and go into a purchase invoice, so I've got a purchase invoice set up here ready to post that is Gramworks in relation to the acquisition of this new site. I've put my cost in here, I've put my park in here. If I just move along slightly, you can also then see that I have set my project number and my project task number. Now the project task number specifies within each of those lines which this cost actually relates to. If I now go ahead and post this purchase invoice, and we now go back to the project, I can drill into my construction costs in the line that I'd specified, and I can now see that that invoice that I've just posted as the £2,000 is also now visible against the project. So this is a really great way of being able to manage ongoing projects. If you've got budgets in place for projects and you want to be able to keep control of spend against budget, managing as a project is a great way to do this without, again, using external, maybe Excel documents to be able to keep track of those costs against any budget that's been set. Now moving on to inventory management. One area that I'm firstly just going to show is units. So it may be something that you are aware of already. When you are processing sales, when you have units in EliteParks, each of these units are actually associated to stock items. So we can see we've got a number of Willoughby Clearwaters here. If I look at the unit card for one of these and scroll down to the inventory section, I can see the associated item number. If I just drill into this item number, I can actually see that we have a total of 34 of these in stock at the moment, and the unit cost is around £37,000. What you will find when you are processing deals and completing deals is that that stock actually decreases as and when you are selling those units. Another area that inventory can be used is point of sale. So if we go into point of sale and I'm going to sell a gas bottle, then when the part complete their end of day process, if I now go into items and look for my gas bottle, I can see we've got 53 here in stock, and if I drill into that number, I can see that that entry from me processing through point of sale has actually reduced the number that we hold in stock. So point of sale is another area where you can manage items. You can link an item to a point of sale item so that that stock movement happens automatically as and when you're selling stock. Another area that can also use inventory is within deals. Now, I know that I've already mentioned the fact that units are automatically associated to stock items. You also have options in here to associate deal extras with stock items. So in this deal, I have selected a gas bottle to be included. There's a cost price here. We've also said that we're going to sell this gas bottle to the customer. Then when it comes to completing this deal, once the deal has been completed, if we just navigate to the sales invoice, we can see here on the sales invoice that not only do I have a line for the stock item being the unit, but I've also got a line for the stock item as the gas bottle. And if I just do a preview posting on this invoice, as well as the system creating general ledger entries, it's also creating some item ledger entries. And looking at those item ledger entries, one of those is associated with this gas bottle to take the gas bottle out of stock. So if I now just go ahead and post the sales invoice, and again I'm going to go back to our items and look at that gas bottle, and that's now moved down to 52 from 53, and I can clearly see it was linked to a sales invoice, and again I can see that movement out of stock at the net price and also the cost that we had determined within the deal as well. So there are many examples of how inventory can be used in EliteParks to manage things, not just units or gas bottles that I've described, but other things that you maybe like to keep a stock check of. You want to be able to see that stock movement as and when things are sold. And it's probably important to note here as well that it's not just the quantity movement that happens on that stock. If I was to now look in my general ledger entries, I will be able to see many transactions in relation to gas bottles where the actual value is being moved out of stock. It's going through my cost of sales general ledger code, and obviously the income for that is being posted as well. So it's a really efficient way of being able to manage inventory without the need for a lot of manual input, just based on the way that the system gets set up. All of those transactions are automatically happening for you and allow you to have much greater control over stock. Some of you may have multiple parks that actually are owned by different legal entities, and this can be managed using Elite Finance inside of EliteParks, where intercompany transactions are required between those parent companies based on the park that's being transacted. This is something that can be set up in the background, and those intercompany postings actually happen automatically. So just to look at a very basic part of the setup, if we firstly look at the parks here, and we've then got a parent code assigned to each of these parks. So in this situation, AF sits under parent code SF, and park HW sits under parent code HW. If I then go into a general journal firstly, and this is just a simple journal where we're moving something within the same general ledger code. It's been posted accidentally to Park AF, and actually it should have been posted to HW, and as we've just seen, those two parks actually sit in different legal entities. If I do a preview posting of this and we look at the general ledger entries that have been generated, not only do we have the entries to show the movement as I had defined in the actual journal itself, but we also then have these intercompany entries that are automatically created to show that the money is owed between the two parks. Likewise, if we go into a purchase invoice, so I'm just going to select an invoice here where we can see that the part code set on the header of the invoice is head office. Now in this example we're saying that we manage centralized purchasing. All of our purchase invoices go via head office. They all get paid from a single bank account. Then if I move down to the lines of the purchase invoice, which give me the detail on where the expense would be posted to, this is an invoice that has came in with two different costs associated. One being a cost that sits with Park AF, the other one being a cost that sits with Park HW. So again, if we were to do a preview posting here, and look at our general ledger entries, what we can now see is the money's being posted to site maintenance for the actual expense on the invoice. We've got the VAT being posted, we've got the amount being posted to our creditors control account, and then again, because of the fact that Park AF doesn't sit within the same parent company as HW and head office, we've got these intercompany transactions that are automatically being created to show that SF will owe that money to the parent company HW. So those are just two examples of where intercompany is automatically happening. Other areas of the system that you would already use at the moment, such as point of sale, if there are point of sale transactions being taken on one park but maybe the money relates to another park and those parks both sit in different legal entities, again those intercompany transactions just happen automatically. So this is a huge benefit of using Elite Finance, having all of the setup enabling that intercompany to just flow itself and not something that again has to be looked into as a manual process or a manual reconciliation. A really useful feature that can be used as part of a month-end process is GL account reconciliations. So where the team may currently complete balance sheet recs probably outside of the system once other month-end processes have been completed, you can actually complete these reconciliations in EliteParks. I'm going to take a look at bookings, but deals is a great example as well on how this can be used. So because bookings in EliteParks get processed with money being posted firstly into a deferred income account, then when that booking has happened, an income recognition routine releases the money from the deferred income and moves that into the P&L. Likewise really with deals, that the money will be posted into a deal deposit account on the balance sheet, then when the deal completes, that money will be moved from the balance sheet onto the customer's account to go against a sales invoice. Both of these are really good examples where a balance sheet reconciliation can be completed. So if we take a look at the bookings one here, we've set our general ledger code to tell the system this is the general ledger code for bookings deferred income. You've then got some other options here if you wanted to only look at specific date range, maybe if you were only looking at maybe the prior month to complete the reconciliation. So you can sort of filter this down as much as you possibly want to, also using park filters and department filters if needed. Then if I just scroll down here to look at the balances that are shown to us, we've got all debit entries and credit entries that can then be reconciled off against each other. In a similar way to when we looked at the bank reconciliation, there is an option here to do an automatic match, or I can choose to do a manual match. So if I wanted to do a manual match here, if I find an entry that I can see that clearly matches off against the other, I've got an entry for £131.67, we've got the debit side here and the credit side here. I can then simply say match manually, and those two entries are now matched against each other, and the unreconciled amount has moved into the amount to reconcile on both the debit side and also on the credit side. Alternatively, you can use this match automatically option, which when I've clicked that, you'll see lots of these numbers have now moved across into the amount to reconcile. Once you're happy that that reconciliation has been completed, just a case of selecting post here, and that will update the entries in your general ledger to show that those entries have been reconciled. So when you then go back to look at general ledger entries and you maybe want to do reporting at a general ledger entry level, you're able to filter out those entries that have already been reconciled to see that they've been dealt with, and therefore you can identify what balances you're left with as your correct deferred income balance. And as I say, that's something that can be completed on other general ledger codes if needs be. So in this example, we've got deal payments in here as well. You could have various different general ledger codes that are being used for these GL account reconciliations. So even if it's not something that you tend to do on a month by month basis, definitely when you get to year end, you would need to somehow be able to confirm the amounts that in your deferral account correctly links back to maybe future bookings, for example, or deals that haven't yet completed. So it's a really useful tool to get to that answer by completing these reconciliations. And obviously the fact that you've got the option to do the match automatically can take away a lot of the manual matching that would be required if you were to do this reconciliation outside of a system. When it comes to reporting on financials in EliteParks, there are many options to choose from, varied on the level of detail that you want to actually achieve. I'm going to start by looking at just the simple chart of accounts and using some filters on here so that I'm just viewing the income statement, and then I'm going to add some date filters and a park filter into here as well. So you should see as these filters are being added that the numbers that we can see in the net change on the chart of accounts are changing. So the information is only visible now based on those filters that I've determined. I can then drill into these numbers if I wanted to look in more detail, and I can see that these filters have filtered through into these entries to show me only for the park that I'm looking at and the dates that I've determined. I'm just scrolling along in here to also show that in this example where we're looking at a general ledger code that's relating to caravan sales, we can also see the unit number and the deal number being stamped on each of those transactions. This would also be the same if we were to look at a general ledger code that relates to booking income. So if I just go into bookings to show how you can also view this at the actual record level if you wanted to. So going into a particular booking, I can look at my general ledger entries here. And if I just scroll along again, so each of these entries are showing me when monies have been taken, when money has been put into a deferral account, and then when that money has been released. Again, this is stamped with the unit number and the booking number. So if you wanted to start reporting on higher fleet revenue and actually looking at the unit level to see how much income is being generated per unit, that's possible to do. Likewise, if I just come out of bookings and go into completed deals, I can get a similar view on completed deals, again looking at general ledger entries, looking at the invoice that has been posted in relation to this deal, and likewise when I scroll along I can also see the unit number and the deal number that's associated with that as well. There are also multiple dimensions that can be used for reporting in EliteParks, park and department are always set as your standard dimensions, but there are also options to use other dimensions such as deal number if you wanted to track a cost of a deal, for example, and not just the income that's been generated against that deal. So I'm now looking at an analysis by dimension. The example that I'm going to use in here is looking at the park code, but as I say, this is something that you could also use against deals if you wanted to, so that you can get a true picture of both the income that's been generated and the cost associated with that income on a deal. So once I've set my date filters in here, I then get to see a matrix view. So based on the dates that I've chosen on the previous screen, I can see that this is the total amount of revenue that's been posted to these codes, and then I can also see how that has been broken down between individual parks. And if I want to drill into these numbers, I can do to then get more detail on the actual income that's been posted there. Now I'm going to take a look at budgets. So you do have an option to set budgets inside of the system. So we've got a 2026 budget set up here. So this budget is pulling through all of the income statement codes from the chart of accounts and allows you to then set budget amounts per month. You can go into more detail if you want to. So within each of these entries, I can specify certain parks. So I could have multiple parks in here that are then making up that total budget. It's really easy to change the budget if you wanted to make amendments to it. You've got this option to simply export to Excel. Once you've exported to Excel, it's a case of making those changes in an Excel document and then importing back into the system. I'll then show how these budgets can be used later on when we start to look at the actual financial reports that can be generated. As well as budgets, there is this concept of statistical accounts. So we've got a statistical account set up here for unit sales. What this allows you to do is actually post unit numbers of things that have happened during a period of time that you would like to be able to report on. So if I go into my balance of unit sales, I've got various postings in here in relation to different date periods, and this is simply giving the system, in this example, a count of deals that have happened. You could have statistical accounts in here for things like bookings as well, if you wanted to also report on the number of bookings that have happened alongside the actual revenue that's been generated from those. So to use these statistical accounts, it's a really simple process of being able to post a journal into those statistical accounts. So once you maybe get to the end of the month and you know how many deals have processed in that month, it's a case of coming into the journal, putting your count of deals in this case that have happened, selecting the part code if you want to also assign a department code to that as well, and just simply registering that journal. If I then go back into my statistical accounts, I can see that that's now been increased by the number that I've just posted. So it's not something directly that you are financially doing inside of the system, but it allows you to then input this information into financial reports in order to get things like your average unit margin, for example, when it comes to looking at income generated on unit sales versus also the actual number of unit sales that have happened. And then the last thing that I'm going to show before we do dive into the actual reporting options is account categories against GL codes. So I think this will be something that's probably familiar to everyone in any financial system, that you're able to categorize based on assets, liabilities, income, expenditure. The way in which you can assign these categories inside of Elite Finance, you can assign an account category, but also an account subcategory. And the account subcategory then allows for further reporting. I would say it enables you to add general ledger codes as long as they sit within the correct account subcategory. You're not then having to manage financial reports and make changes to financial reports, because those reports aren't based on specific general ledger codes. They're actually based on these account subcategories. So this is something that can be completely personalized to then have your categories and add those relevant general ledger codes into each of those categories. Once that has been completed, if we then have a look at financial reporting, now there are a few different options here as well as to how you can report. We have lots of different examples here, but again, this is something that if you have a very specific report that you use on a monthly basis, the chances that the report can be generated from within EliteParks. So I'm firstly just going to take a look at this P&L at the bottom here, which is a P&L for statutory accounting purposes. And if I just view my financial report, so I'm looking at this information currently on a monthly basis, it's giving me the net change for January 2025. It's also showing me the net change from the same period last year. I've got my variance in here as a value, but also my variance as a percentage, and then I can move along here and see various other numbers like the year-to-date balance, year-to-date variance, for example. So that's one example of a report layout that can be used. Another example that we have is this additional P&L report. So again, if I go to view my financial report, and I'm just going to scroll back up to the top here. Now, what you will see in this example is that we actually carry the number of units sold as well as caravan sales. So when we looked earlier at the statistical accounts, this is an example of a report that's now pulling through the numbers that have been posted into that statistical account. So I can see how many sales have happened as well as the actual income that's been generated from those sales. I've also been able to then add an additional line into this report to say, based on the number of sales and the income generated, I want a calculation of my average unit margin. And then just to add to that as well, you've also got your dimensions available in each of these reports. So if I wanted to only look at maybe one park specifically, I can quite easily filter on one park and it changes those numbers for me. Likewise, I could put multiple park filters in here. And then the last example of the P&L that we will look at is this P&L, which includes actual amounts posted during a period of time, but also what the current month budget is. So we can see our net change during the current month. We've then got those budget numbers pulling through here from the budget that we looked at previously. It's then calculating the variance for us as well. And just without going into too much detail to explain, when I mentioned earlier about the account categories, the way in which these reports are created, you have an option to say use general ledger codes or actually just use account categories. This is an example here where we have created the report using account categories. So as I say, add in further general ledger codes as you continue using the system isn't an issue. As long as you're then assigning that to an account category, it will just automatically flow through into these reports. And then lastly, I'm just going to show cash flow reporting that can be generated as well. So because the system is obviously tracking everything that's going through, not just the chart of accounts, but through bank accounts as well, you are able to run standard cash flow reports from EliteParks, similar to the different P&Ls that we've just looked at. If you wanted to generate something like this yourselves, you can do, but there is also a standard version in here that can be used. So hopefully from some of those examples that you've seen, you've got a bit of an idea of the capabilities on reporting from EliteParks when using Elite Finance, there are many different options on the level of data that you choose to input into the system that then determines how much you can obviously get out of the system. But you should be able to see where possibly at the moment there are manual processes of extracting information out of a finance system, maybe manipulating things in Excel to be able to get the exact reporting that you want. Actually using Elite Finance, you're able to do that yourselves in the system, or use standard functionality that's here already to generate those reports. One of the options when it comes to financial reporting within EliteParks is utilising Power BI and actually having financial reporting embedded within the system. So we use an add-in tool called eNotion, which has a predefined set of reports that can be used on the financial side of the system. So all of this is pre-built and can just be plugged into the system and used straight away. I can choose to view this in a bigger mode if I want to, and once this opens you'll see how we can then drill into different numbers here if I want to look at anything in more detail. So we've got a table here that I can look at the balance sheet, for example. I can drill into my assets, see what my current assets are made up of. We've then got some reports in here looking at your income statement. If I wanted to look at April, for example, in the income statement, you'll see this is then also drilling down on the other charts that are visible in here. So this is a complete interactive way that you can report from your finance system, but also use this on a daily basis to be able to drill in and look into things in a bit more detail. And this isn't just something that can be used on the role centre, this can be used in various other parts of the system as well. So if we were to look into customers, for example, we've then got another report that's visible here that's looking at our accounts receivable, summarising where that income is coming from, how much income's been generated, the balance on the accounts. So it's a really useful tool to give quick insights into various different financial areas of the system. And as I say, this is a pre-configured set of reports that easily get plugged into the system, so you're not having to learn how to create Power BI reports yourselves. They are simply there, readily available for you to use. One of the huge benefits of using EliteParks and Elite Finance is that you are beginning to use the wider Microsoft ecosystem, and with that brings functionality that wouldn't necessarily be available across other platforms, such as Microsoft Copilot, which is the AI-powered assistant that many people are using at the moment. You will find that this is actually available inside of EliteParks. So where you can see this icon at the top, this is Copilot, and this is actively working within the system on a daily basis. You can use this to help you work out a process if you're not quite sure on something, or you can also use this to find information for you. So if I use vendors as an example here, and I'm then going to open Copilot, and I'm just going to ask a really simple question. So I'm asking if that can show me the last invoice that was posted to one of our vendors. I'm not giving a vendor number here, I am just giving the vendor name in the hope that Copilot will still be able to identify exactly what it is that I'm asking for. And there we go, it has the answer for me already. So the last posted purchase invoice for Aerial Express, the information is here, and it's also telling me that if I want to view it, I can click on this prompt, and it will show me then all invoices with the last invoice at the top that I'm looking to actually get information on. Another way that we can see how using Microsoft across multiple platforms means that you can link systems to each other. If I just bring over an email that has been received here, I have an option to open apps from within Outlook. Business Central is here as an available app for me to open. And I can then use Contact Insights from within my email to view what information is posted within EliteParks. So if you have emails that are coming in from customers, from vendors, and you maybe want to have a look and see when's the last time that we transacted with them, or did we possibly have some invoices that were outstanding for payment, you can quite quickly do that from within Outlook itself using this Business Central add-in. Now in this example, the email has come from someone at Insight Software. They have both a vendor account and a customer account. I can drill into either of these, and as I say, you can then start to look at communication that's happened with them. You can also look at statistics. So in this example, using document output, we've sent multiple emails to them. I can drill as far into these as I want to get information in that way. If I scroll down, it then takes us to some customer statistics. So if there were any outstanding invoices, for example, I would be able to drill into these and look at what invoices we were waiting to have paid. So those are just two quick examples really of how using Elite Finance, because it's in the Microsoft platform already, allows you to then utilize additional features that maybe normally would sit outside of EliteParks or outside of your finance system.
Thank you very much, Kim. It was very, very insightful. Thoroughly enjoyed myself there listening to all things finance today. If anyone does have any questions, you can use that Q&A functionality up at the top of your Teams channel. Just whilst we're having a little think about if we've got any questions, I do have one very important question for you, Kim, around permissions, because we all know that finance people don't like to share what they're up to. They're hiding it all away, working behind the iron curtain. So how do we make sure that people that are non-finance are not accessing or transacting, I guess more importantly, in areas that they shouldn't be?
So the way that permissions work, not just in Elite Finance, but also in EliteParks. So some people may be using these permissions already. Rather than restrict access, though, the permissions are there to give access to certain areas. So we would always show customers as part of a finance implementation how to manage those permissions, how to set permissions up for users so that they're only able to access the areas of the system that they need to and can't access more financial information like bank accounts, things posted to general ledger accounts, for example.
Fantastic. And if someone was considering looking at Elite Finance, completing that full picture, what do you see are the quickest wins for anyone that would look to implement Elite Finance alongside EliteParks?
I definitely think moving everything into a single platform is going to save a lot of time instantly by removing the need to manually export something from EliteParks into another finance system and not having to then reconcile numbers between two systems on maybe a monthly basis. I'd say in addition to that, like you should be able to see from all of the processes that we've looked at today, they are all about streamlining what you do, improving the accuracy and the efficiency. So ultimately, it's then going to increase your reporting accuracy as well.
Perfect. I've got a little question here. Will we get a copy of the webinar emailed to us? Absolutely. You can relive this moment over and over again to your heart's content. We'll get that out to you later on, hopefully today. And just a thank you to you, Kim, as well, from somebody else. I've always been unsure of the distinction between standard financial functionality within EP/BC and what Elite Finance provide. Is there a clear distinction between the two?
I'd have to sit and go through each of the modules to get a clear distinction, but there are definitely features that we use as an add-on that wouldn't just be available in Business Central, and very much in the way that we've set EliteParks up to work alongside Business Central is unique in the way that the two link together.
So I guess Business Central's given us the sort of the foundation that we need, and then as we've done with EliteParks, we've built on top of it to make sure that it matches the flows that you need if you're working on a park.
Yeah.
Fantastic. That was just the 2 questions there for you. If you do have any further questions, or you want to maybe actually sit down with a consultant or your account manager and actually speak about what this would mean for your business, you can, of course, reach out directly to your account managers. They will be more than happy to help guide that conversation, and I'm sure that you will be hearing from them later on when they've got that recording for you. But for myself and Kim, I think we're going to finish up there for today. Thank you so much. We do appreciate you taking the time out on a Friday morning to come and listen to us all about finance. And I'm sure if you actually, just on that, if you do want to have a little look, and a little preview there of eNotion, if you head over to our YouTube channel, we actually do have a webcast with eNotion as well, and you would actually be able to see that in some more depth. Or depending on where you're looking at this, those guys are actually going to be at our customer day, and they'll be doing a live demo of the solution there as well. So I'll leave it there because we'll end up going round and round circles and chatting. So from myself, Kim, and Edwin in the background, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you all again in the future. Bye for now.
Thank you.